Just as we worked top-down to develop the scope and high-level deliverables, we'll do the same thing in gathering our requirements. That is, we start by taking one of our major deliverables, and we talk to the people who are going to be accountable for it, accountable for producing it. We discuss what they need to produce that deliverable. Please note that we're not talking with people about what they want or what good ideas they have about this project and want to add to it. Instead, we're talking only about the things that are required to produce the deliverable that their boss has made them accountable for. In other words, requirements gathering is not having people come sit on Santa's lap. We're focused on adding only things that are required to produce each of our high-level deliverables. In this process, we also want to maintain the traceability of these requirements to the people who identified them. As an example, if you're accountable for a deliverable of, let's just say, 95% of the employees can find 5 supply items in 10 minutes, I'm going to ask you as project manager, what do you need to produce that end result? You'll tell me you need training materials, a classroom, and that 98% of the employees attend class. And you also need a new iPad, you say. Well, we discussed the last requirement and agreed that really a new iPad would be nice, but it's not really necessary to produce the accountable deliverable. So we include the other 3 requirements, and you're making a commitment at the same time that you can produce the end result with those requirements, with those ingredients, sort of. In addition, a good project manager keeps a record of what requirements were identified for each major deliverable, who identified them. That keeps the accountability clear. Finally, we want to surface all possible requirements now and deal with them, just like we dealt with your iPad request, not in the middle of the project. That's a key to good requirements gathering. This approach to requirements gathering yields a number of very significant dividends. First, by defining all of our requirements as deliverables with metrics, we avoid those disputes over what is and what is not included in the project. If our definitions of requirements are vague, we leave ourselves wide open to those disputes, which the PM loses after they are escalated. This is significant for projects within an organization, particularly because we want users who are satisfied they got what was planned. It is even more significant for projects we do for external customers or clients, where these disputes about what is and what is not in the project always yield a dissatisfied customer, but also usually cause us to add substantial amounts of work to the project to do the stuff they wanted, for which we're not paid, and that's a killer. As we begin to execute, new requirements will arise. We don't want to fight against them, but we want to go through our change control process and quantify the duration and cost increase necessary to cover the impact of those additions. On internal projects within an organization, that's what lets us finish projects on time. With projects done for a customer or client, that approach allows us to complete these projects profitably and to make money on change orders. While it takes some work, there's a handsome payback for defining every requirement as a deliverable. That lets us avoid subjective interpretations of what that deliverable should actually consist of. Our end result in requirements gathering is a network of major deliverables and their sub-deliverables, which form the backbone of our work breakdown structure, schedule, and our budget. As you see in the slide, we start with the scope and the high-level deliverables that we define with a sponsor. Then we decompose those major deliverables into this hierarchy of smaller and smaller deliverables down to the level of deliverables that will be the accountability of a single team member or contractor. Now, there are a number of decomposition techniques that we'll utilize to break those major deliverables down into the smaller pieces as we meet with the other stakeholders and subordinates. In this process, it's very important to have the person who is accountable for the major deliverable be involved in the decision making about what's necessary to produce that deliverable. That's how we do the decomposition. The first of these decomposition techniques is called incremental decomposition. It's the most commonly used. When you look at the four sub-deliverables you see on the screen, you see that they literally add up to that higher level deliverable. Each of the deliverables is a savings amount, and the higher level deliverable is the sum of those savings amounts. So the project's designed with each of those departments being accountable for the contribution of a specific dollar amount. We see incremental decomposition used a great deal, as I said. If we need to reduce an error rate rather than dollars, we might see high-level deliverables that were target error rates in each of the departments. And again, they add up to the higher level achievement. Now, that would give us a scope of a lower target error rate. Similarly, if we have a project aimed at reducing customer service turnaround time, the sub-deliverables under that higher level deliverable might be the amount of turnaround time that each department has to deliver, and the sum of those is the turnaround time we want. They add up to the target turnaround time for the customer service process. Incremental decompositions are simple, easily understood by your sponsor and stakeholders, and they make the accountability of the individual departments in this example very clear. On a bigger project, we may have incremental decomposition at a number of levels in a very large network. Now let's go ahead and look at another type of decomposition. What you see on the screen is a sequential decomposition. Notice that the deliverables occur in a sequence with each one dependent on the one that comes before. The end result in this example is a sales level on an internet site. We start the process by getting a good position in a search engine. That has to happen first. Then we attract 100,000 visitors a month. That's dependent on that good web position. If we achieve that, we work on getting 45% of the visitors to return to our website. Finally, we want to make those visitors place 25,000 orders on our website. These steps lead to our end result. This type of decomposition is used frequently in the construction industry, where the foundation must be completed before we can start work on the first floor. And that has to be done before we can start work on the second floor. The entire structure has to be completed before we can do the interior finish and installation of equipment. All of these achievements have to occur in a sequence. We also see sequential decompositions like this in creating software and developing new products. The third type of decomposition is judgmental decomposition. Here, there's no sequence or incremental relationship between the deliverables. We can work on them all simultaneously. Think of this form of decomposition as a recipe for an award-winning beef stew. We have to have beef in a certain quantity, so many carrots, onions, and spices, all in specific quantities. And the combination, when we mix them all up together, yields something that tastes good. That's the way judgmental decomposition works. In the example on the slide, you see that we're trying to keep engineer turnover at less than 8% a year. Working with a sponsor, maybe human resources, maybe outside experts, the project manager and that group have put together 4 deliverables which they think, in their expert judgment, should keep the turnover rate at the target level. For judgmental decomposition, even as well as the other techniques, remember that the project manager is not deciding what the components are. That's the sponsor's job. Instead, the project manager is meeting with other people and having higher level decision makers and stakeholders decide on the components. That's their accountability. Regardless of the decomposition technique you use with the users and stakeholders of the project, you have to convert the vague ideas and activities they come up with into measured deliverables with a metric. The example on the slide is some people you've been talking to about a training class for a new system, and they do customer service, taking customer service calls. So you start talking with the manager of the department and the trainer maybe about what they want out of the training, and you come up with, they want people to be able to use the system. Then you talk about, well, how should they be able to use it? And the second box you see is they want them to become more efficient using the system. And you talk about that, how will we measure that they're more efficient? And that's when you come up with your metric that 80% of the people who attend the class can answer the top 15 customer questions in 30 seconds or less. And that's your metric that is the trainer's accountability. And the test at the end of the class will be on whether they can do that or not. This next one is an example of a design task. And very often, we'll have to use a yes-no measure on a design deliverable. Either the executive approves the design or they don't, in which case you go back to the drawing board. It's yes or no. As we analyze the activity on the slide, somebody might mention that completing the design is enough. And you say, no, how are we going to measure that the design was a good one? And we find, well, there's really not anything we can count to measure, the number of pages certainly doesn't say how good the design is. So we come back and we think about it, and we translate what's going to be a good design into having it accepted by an executive or the manager who's asked for the design to be done. So it's a yes-no kind of a metric. So we have a file room that's an inefficient mess at the moment. And we sit down to talk with people about how to clean it up, what we need out of that file room. We want to make it more organized. And then as you see on the screen, you ask them some questions about what they really want, and they may say, well, we don't want files on the floor and strewn all over, and we certainly want them in alphabetical order. So you say, okay, let's talk about how we measure that. And you say, well, can 100% of them be on the shelves in alphabetical order? And the people say, no, we always have some that are out. And so then you might agree on the fact that the deliverable we want from the people who are going to clean up the file room is that 98% of the files are on the shelves in alphabetical order. That's your metric. Okay, let's take another situation. We have a noisy operating area. We want to try and improve the efficiency, and one of the issues is there's so much noise that it is interfering with people's work. We want to make it quieter. So you sit down, you see the example on the slide here. You sit down, they want to make it quieter. And they ask, well, what do you mean? How do we measure that? What level of quiet do we have to have? And they say, well, it should be quiet enough like being in a classroom or in a church service when no one's talking. And you say, well, okay, so that's a certain decibel level. Let's say we need to do sound insulation so that the room has a noise level less than 41 decibels. That's our metric. The outcome of all that decomposition and conversion of activities to metrics is a network of deliverables that leads to our scope. Now, the thinking involved here is difficult, there's no question, but practice makes it easier. And you'll find after you've been managing projects for a while that asking these questions, the right questions, and making the conversions to metrics becomes a natural part of your project management discussion. What's particularly interesting about this is how appealing it is to other people. And you'll find that it's sort of infectious in a good way, and then it spreads through the organization. And more people start talking about deliverables and defining them with actual metrics of what they're going to get. It's interesting how fast it spreads. Now let's take a look at our case study and see what the final network is going to look like. So let's go back and talk about the project you're doing for that business supply room. Remember, you talked to a department manager about it. You joined 7 other employees for the requirements section, and you started off by explaining that you didn't want to assemble a wish list of good ideas, but instead wanted to focus on what was required, what was absolutely necessary to produce each of the major deliverables that the department manager had approved. You started with Pearl and said, Pearl, the manager wants you to be accountable for designing the new supply room layout and procedure so that people can retrieve supplies they need in 2 minutes on average. That's what the design has to do. Now, what do you need to produce that design so that the department manager can approve it? Pearl opened her notebook and said, I've been thinking about that after the manager spoke to me, and I would like to get a book on business supply inventories. I found what I need on Amazon. It costs $35. That will help me do a professional job. You stifled a smile and said, that's exactly right, Pearl. That's something you absolutely have to produce the kind of deliverable the department manager has assigned you. I'll add it to my list. Is there anything else you need to produce that design for the business supply room? Pearl thought for a moment and then said, well, I need data on how much of each of our supplies we've used over the past year, so I know how much room they're going to need in the supply room. But I already have that data, so it's not really a new requirement. I can go get it whenever I need it. However, I'm a little bit concerned about hitting that 2-minute goal with the poor lighting we have in the supply room. That really increases the amount of time it takes to find something. Now, is that really part of my accountability? Well, you smiled and said, absolutely. That's exactly what we need to add. And boy, it's great to find out about it now rather than after we start moving the supplies in. So the one thing about that is we need to establish a metric about how good the lighting has to be. Let me tentatively suggest one and see what you think. If we lit the supply room at a level of 500 lumens, that's the standard for grammar school classrooms, by the way, that should be more than bright enough for our people to find their supplies. Everybody nodded, so you wrote it down and asked, are there any other requirements for the first major deliverable? Mindy Frome, the controller, said, yes, I have 2 requirements. First, I'm concerned about the cost of increasing the supply inventory. Pearl, who obviously didn't care for Mindy, snapped, we're not sure we're going to increase the inventory. Mindy ignored her and said, I would still like to have a chance to review any additional investment in inventory. You said, before Pearl could say anything more, absolutely no problem. Why don't we add an achievement that you approve the final supply inventory cost? Mindy said, that's perfect. My second requirement is that this project is the ideal opportunity to build a system for charging back supply costs to the departments that actually use them. It'll cut down on waste. I'd require a chargeback system be installed in the supply room so people could record what they take out. You said, well, I understand why you'd like to be able to do that, but that chargeback system is not necessary for us to deliver our project scope. And that scope is that people find stuff in 2 minutes, and your chargeback system might actually increase the amount of time it takes them to retrieve supplies they need. So I'm going to note it on the requirements register, but I'm also going to recommend that this not be included in the project plan. It'll increase the cost and the duration and may even be a barrier to us achieving the scope of the project. Mindy wasn't happy, and she said, I understand where you're coming from, but I'm going to talk to the department manager anyway and try to convince him to include it. And you said, that's perfect. That's what I want. Let's find out about all the possible requirements and deal with them up or down before we start work on the project. That'll keep things moving along nicely. So please do lodge your complaint. Let's get it decided. You turn to the group. Are there any other requirements on the first major deliverable? Everybody shook their heads, and so you said, okay, let's move on and talk about the other requirements we have for our high-level deliverables. Well, 35 minutes later, you had decomposed all the major deliverables and, as importantly, converted each of them to a metric so you could measure whether we delivered it. And that gave you all you needed to go ahead and begin the project scheduling. Okay, our requirements gathering process has to be limited to identifying those deliverables that are required for us to produce the major deliverables of the project. That's what the sponsor defined during our strategic planning session. We are not gathering a wish list from the project stakeholders. We're focusing very, very narrowly on the specific things that we need to produce to hit those major deliverables. That's our screen, that's our box that we're working in. Project managers who use these techniques are able to control the scope of their projects and prevent scope creep. They also have happier users because there are no conflicts about what is and what is not included in the project. That's clearly defined before we start work by our scope definition and deliverables. Finally, these project managers position themselves to finish on time and within the budget because they have a change control process that explicitly identifies what is included in the project and what is an addition, for which we're going to need extra budget and time. Now it's your chance to try all these techniques in your case study.